related with Italy, you know, because it seems we have a strong connection with Italy. In 2012, you were in Verona.
Yes.
For the Italo-Irish literary
right.
exchange.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And then in the 2013, you won the Boccaccio International Prize for Fiction.
Yes.
So it's very important.
It was a huge honor. Yeah, yes. Very much so.
So if I'm not wrong, the book was first released in Italian.
It was, yes, it was.
Because the title is basically the same.
The title is the same. They often don't do that, but in this case they did. They thought that the title sounded good in Italian, because sometimes the translation, it can sound a little bit, a direct translation can sound a little clumsy, but in this case it worked. And the reason for the fact that it was published earlier in Italy was by Guanda, yes, excellent publishers, but the British publisher had a delay, had a clash in the schedule, so although the book was ready to be published also in October of 2012, it had to be delayed.
Okay.
But it's quite possible that, you know, things like that happen again, because I'm astonished at the speed and the efficiency of Italian publishers. Our traditional method of publishing, both in Ireland and in the UK, is much slower. And even though the book has to be translated, the Italian publisher can seem to be ready for the market a few months earlier, which, you know, is good.
Ada made a good job.
Absolutely. I mean, I have huge respect for the work of literary translators. And I think that there's probably, well, there's lots of reasons for that, but two that immediately come to mind. I feel in English-speaking countries we are too Anglo-centric, that we've got literature from the United States, India, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, Canada. We have English, literature in English, which makes us very lazy, I think, about trying to access other voices and other lives through translation. So the translated fiction market in Ireland and in the UK would be very, very small indeed. Now there are some changes in that. There is a prize here called the Impact Prize, which is administered by Dublin City Libraries.
Yes.
And that is open to translated fiction. And that's fantastic. And one of the things which they do, of which I heartily approve, if the book that wins the Impact is a translated fiction, a translated novel, the translator gets 25% of the prize.
It's because you gave part of your prize.
And that's why, because I think that's a wonderful. I think it's a proper acknowledgement of the sort of work that somebody does, because good translation by its very nature has to be invisible. But that doesn't mean that the translator should be invisible. And Aldo Bussi, when I was in Certaldo Alto, told me that up until a few years ago in Italy, that the translator's name didn't even appear in the book. So, you know, it's time that those things changed. So for me, this was a small acknowledgement of the work that all translators do. And I was delighted that it began a little bit of a debate. And people began to say, well, yes, our work is valuable and we should be acknowledged and we should demand proper pay and conditions.
Yes, you have to speak with people about a problem. Suddenly, there is a problem.
Exactly. And I think, you know, when it takes perhaps something provocative to begin the debate, and then people feel confident to come together because now they know that all of their colleagues feel the same way.
Yes,
so
yes.
Let's hope that it begins to change things a little bit.
Okay, so you are famous in Italy, of course.
Yeah, I am well known in Italy,
yes. But all the more because, you know, Veronica Lario, ex-wife, Berlusconi ex-wife, quoted from your book in the beginning. But I was wondering, Ada translated for you the Italian title?
No, that was actually, would you believe, a Danish woman called Eva Kampmann, who was my translator back in those days, and she moved on to do other things in later years. I understand that in the beginning does not sound well in Italian, a direct translation.
Yes, but the funny thing is the title in Italian is Half of Nothing.
Half of Nothing.
So
Yes,
it's ironic in an Irish way, don't you think?
I thought it was a really good alternative title, because in the book she does say, without her husband, you know,
Yes.
given the way society
Yes.
is structured, I was part of something while you were here,
Yes.
but when you abandoned me, I'm half of nothing. So, and I thought in her particular circumstances,
in these circumstances, very, very
it was an
ironic.
interesting. It was, yes, an interesting coincidence.
Okay. Talking about the book of Giovanni Boccaccio Price, The Things We Know Now, it's a very tragic issue in the book. So I was wondering, why are you interested in bullying and cyberbullying?
Okay. Oh, there's lots of answers to that. I mean, in many ways, writers say that we don't actually choose our stories, that our stories choose us. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I knew that I wanted to deal with a family in crisis, because the theatre of the family, as I call it, is something that interests me hugely.
Yes.
I think it's where we learn about love, we learn about rivalry, we learn about jealousy, we learn about intimacy, basically, friendship, everything.
Dynamics of the family.
And the interesting thing is that, you know, where there's more than one child, the dynamics between each child and the parent are very different. So each child has different parents, even though they are the same people.
Yes.
So all of these issues interested me, but I just got a visual image of a young boy on a bicycle pedaling home furiously, obviously distraught about something. And I had to write the story to find out, what is he running from?
So
why is he so upset?
Daniel.
Yes, and he wasn't called Daniel at that point, but yes, I just saw the image of an adolescent, very, very distraught. And I suppose that a lot of things fed into my interest then in using, because all of my books will start with a character.
Yeah.
They don't start with a theme. I think if you start with a theme, you end up possibly being didactic, or your characters suffer, or some dynamic is missing for me. It always starts with the people. So I had to ask myself the usual writerly question, what if? So what if something happened to this boy that I knew he was going to commit suicide? That was very clear very early on. And I knew that this is what he was going to try and do. Initially I wasn't sure whether he would succeed. And I began to look at all of the things that might make adolescents, that might push them to that edge. Now, I'm a parent, but I was also a teacher for 17 years.
Yes.
And once it occurred to me that this was something to do with a peer group, then it became obvious I had to dig a little deeper. And around the time that I was writing, one young Irish woman, a young girl, had moved with her mother to the United States.
Oh, yes.
And Phoebe Prince was her name. And she was bullied so mercilessly by her school companions that she did a very unfemale thing. She went and hanged herself. Boys will do that kind of violence to themselves, in generally speaking.
Yes.
Girls tend to take other methods. And also their social circle is usually a little bit more developed.
We're cruel.
Yes.
We're more cruel.
We can be, yes. But often girls have the ability often as teenagers to talk, which often young boys don't. Yes. But this bullying was so appalling that this young girl felt she had no support. Her family had broken up. She had no proper friends. She didn't feel close to anybody, and this was it just pushed her over the edge. And I was, like everybody else, horrified by this.
Of course.
And I began to investigate cyberbullying. Bullying has always been with us. I mean, I used to watch young people in the classroom, in the playground, but the difference now is the relentlessness that the internet, that social media, with which they make it possible, that it's 24 hours a day. And whereas when I was teaching, the bully and the victim had to be in the same room, or at least the same school, now it doesn't matter. They can be anywhere.
The cyberbullying is different. It's faster.
And it's also the thing which really distinguishes it is that it is anonymous. And all of the studies that I looked at showed that not just teenagers, but adults We will all do really horrible things if we feel that we are anonymous, that we cannot be traced. So this cloak of anonymity that that social media gives to teenagers, because that's what I was writing about, means that there is no moral compass anymore. It's what you can get away with. And then the additional pressure is, if you're not one of the bullies, well, by definition, you're going to be one of the victims. So there's a pressure to be one of the...
a way to...
Or nothing, yeah. And there's no... It's very difficult to steer a middle ground. And it's interesting, even today, before I came here, there's yet another discussion on a radio programme this morning about this. And young people are beginning to fight back, which is good. And schools are helping by developing really robust codes of practice. But it's a phenomenon which involves all of us.
So, more or less, Daniel's father was victim himself of bullying. And again, after 30, 40 years, Daniel is victim himself.
And it's not something which is going to go away. It's what, like what Dacia was talking about in terms of difficulties with immigration. You can't pretend it isn't here and that it's not going to happen. It is happening. Our response as responsible human beings is, how do we find a way to deal with this? We have to accept that it's here. And how do we find a way to control it?
And to control the bullying? Do you think
that's what I'm talking about? Yes.
It's possible.
I think we're never going to completely protect our children. That's just not possible. But I think we can go a long way towards giving them the tools with which to protect themselves. And one of the things which seems to be working among young people is that as soon as they are the victim of something, this project in a school in Cork has given everybody little memory sticks. So as soon as something happens, they are able to take a screenshot of what has occurred and to bring it to a parent or a teacher and say, this is what happened to me. So it has taken the shame, the stigma away, the isolation away from being a person who is bullied and taking back the control. And I think that's a very, very positive.
Not feel guilty to be victim.
Yes, and not feel weak. So you take back the power, you take back the control, and I think that's a really positive development.
But about the book, in some way, at the end of the book, there is a hope.
Yes.
Because Daniel's parents, maybe dealing with the pain, give some reason to death of Daniel, going in trial against
the bully.
The 3 J's.
Yes. I think the most important thing, one of the things which has struck me with all of the research that I did around particularly young people taking their own lives, teenage suicide, both boys and girls, what astonished me was the generosity of the response of the families involved. And I think, there's lots of dark things about our society, lots of dark things about ourselves, but I think this is a wonderful human instinct that when something really terrible happens, something inside us can respond and say, I don't want this to happen to any other family. And for a lot of parents and families, this has been the motivation to set up groups which will support people
to carry on.
Exactly, yeah, and to find some meaning in altruism and helping others in prevention.
Okay, that's an interesting thing. And talking about bullying and cyberbullying, the internet. So the internet is guilty of the crime, or its medium.
I suppose my answer to that is it's a tool, and unfortunately it makes things easier. I'm sure you've never bullied anybody over the internet, and I certainly haven't ever bullied anybody. So it's not that it is responsible for all of the bullying that happens. The problem with it is, with the lack of regulation at the moment, that there is a very, very small chance, if you do behave appallingly online, there's a small chance, only a small chance you're going to be caught. So the answer is, again, deal with it. Have a look at the people who host these sites, who make money out of them through advertising, and insist that they adhere to a code of practice. And if they don't adhere to a code of practice, shut them down. So I've no time for this standing back and saying, oh, there's nothing we can do, this is terrible, it's out of control. No, our response is, what can we do to control this? It'll never be perfect. This will still happen, just like physical bullying happens out in the street every day. But you can equip people, you can equip children to say, no, I'm not going to accept that. I'm not going to allow somebody to treat me like that. And you can equip parents and educators to help children to protect themselves. But it's our responsibility.
Maybe sometimes they try, but they try badly or in a wrong way.
Or so they don't have the information or the tools at their disposal. And those are the things that government, in whatever agency you want to look at, education departments, social departments, health departments of governments, all of these are responsible for helping to ensure that this stops and doesn't escalate, and that we find ways of helping young people to deal with it.
And still, I mean, going to the bright side, still it's also a good medium. I'm thinking of your colleague in some way, Roddy Doyle. His second last book, basically on internet, on Facebook, I mean, Two Pints, is a collection of short stories. So
I think there
is a way, a fantastic way to use the internet.
Like with everything that's very powerful, it can be used for good or it can be used for ill. But the point is, the choice is up to us. There's no point in wringing our hands and saying, oh, the internet is a terrible thing. No, it's here. Deal with it. And make it a force for good rather than a force for evil.
It's impossible to think a word without the internet.
Absolutely. I mean, if our phones go down for half a day, we're all stranded. You know, we don't know what to do. Oh, I didn't get that text. What am I going to do?
What if my maid don't join Catherine?
Exactly. We become over-reliant. I mean, it has wonderful benefits, but it also brings its own stresses, I think, too. And again, that's up to us how we control it. I mean, I know some writer friends of mine, for example, turn off the internet facility while they're writing, because you can go back and switch it on again 3 hours later. The email will still be there. But that's one of the things which it does.
It's a good thing.
It increases people's stress levels, because if an email comes in, you think, oh, I've got to answer that immediately. Whereas if you turn it off for 3 hours, it'll still be there when you finish. So we have the mechanism to control it ourselves.
That's right. Okay, something about Italy.
Sure.
You know, what you like, what you don't. And do you think there are things in common between we Italians and you Irish?
Oh, I think we have a huge amount in common. I mean, even listening to the discussion here today about immigration. And the Italians and the Irish used to fight each other in New York.
Oh, yes.
Big rivalry there. And again, that's because we're so similar. I mean, if you look at the role that the Catholic Church has played in both countries, for example, if you look at the kind of the position of the family, the fact that the family was always a central unit in society. Look at the power of the priests. All of it, we have a huge shared history. I mean, we had our famine, and Italy had several natural disasters like earthquakes and being seriously poverty-stricken after the war, as we were here, not because we had enemies on our soil, but for different reasons. And also, I think we're both really nations of storytellers. I think there is a...
Yes, maybe Italians have forgot completely about immigration.
Do you think?
Removed these things.
It's gone from the consciousness, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It seems to me, because now about immigrants, it seems like
it never happened.
Yes. But I mean, if not you, if not your father, at least your grandfather was.
But this is an interesting and a sad aspect. I think that there's a level of denial. And I think here also, when we had our so-called boom, which was made of smoke and mirrors, it wasn't real, and when everything collapsed, we'd had a huge influx of particularly people from Eastern European countries, and everything was fine while the boom was still going, while there was work for everybody, and then suddenly the boom goes and you see the racism that Dacia was talking about earlier begin to raise its ugly head again. And, you know, I remember saying to somebody, oh, hold on a second, this is what Irish people did. Irish people left their country when there was no food, when there was no work, and when there was no prospect of any kind of economic livelihood for their family. They left one country because they had no choice and they went to another. We, above all nations with our diaspora, should understand.
So we did.
Okay, so there's another similarity that we have in common. And I suppose, I mean, all of my trips to Italy have always been around my books. I still haven't had a holiday in Italy, to my shame.
Okay.
Every time I have been is for work. So I see it, when you go like that, you see a country through the eyes of a tourist. So obviously I see everything about Italy that is wonderful. And there is a lot about Italy that is wonderful. I also understand that you and Ireland and Greece and Portugal and Spain, we're going through a very similar trauma. And I think austerity in all of our countries has produced very, very negative effects. I don't see that when I travel, but I know it's there. So I am aware that there is a dark and an ugly side, as there is to everywhere. But I suppose what I like most is the warmth of the reception I get from readers. It's genuine. And you know, people engage, whether they have liked the book or whether they didn't, that doesn't matter, but they come, they want to talk, and I love that level of participation, that level of readership. And I do a lot of that work here too with libraries, and because most of my life is very solitary, for the time when I have those kind of engagements, it's wonderful.
You're right.
Yes.
You quoted my hometown in one of your books.
Did I?
Yes.
What's your hometown?
Livorno.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
At a time like this.
Yes. Yeah.
When Georgie.
Yeah.
If I'm right.
Yes,
Georgie
you're right, yeah.
goes to Volterra and then decide to go to Livorno to see the sanctuary.
Yes. Well, there you go, you're famous.
Okay, so the other side, Irish books. 5 must-read books.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, except Ulysses. You can't say Ulysses.
That's putting me on the spot.
For Italians that would understand Irish people and Irish culture.
Well, I think Edna O'Brien's books have to be read. Because the type of similarities we're talking about in our backgrounds, and also the things we've been talking about today about women's hidden histories. Edna O'Brien paints a portrait in her early books in particular of what it was like to be a woman in a very rural, male-dominated society. She's a wonderful writer, so I would certainly recommend all of her books. Must read after that, John McGahern, I think, particularly the short stories. They're each of them. They're little jewels. They're absolutely beautiful books. We're talking from the past, are we? Rather than, or you're not limiting me.
No. The only thing is not Ulysses.
No. You know, it's funny because my brother rereads it every Bloomsday. He begins rereading Ulysses on the 16th of June. And he is always captivated by the humour. Now, I have not found that humour, but so, you know, there's something in there for everybody. The other 3 I think I'll have to think about.
Take your time.
Yeah. I think one of the things which has happened is that up until, I suppose, the early 1970s here, literature was very, very male-dominated. And
I agree.
it was dominated both by men and dominated by the countryside, by rural life, because we were overwhelmingly an agricultural nation. Things began to change. And then more women began writing and more women began being published. But I think that what my experience when I began writing in the 1970s was that while I admired and could read and love these books, they didn't speak, apart from Edna O'Brien, they didn't really speak to me. And so women's work has tended to be underrepresented and under-acknowledged, exactly what we're talking about here today in this week of Italian culture. Same old story. So I would have to include Jennifer Johnson, the Irish writer Jennifer Johnson, here also. So that's Jennifer Johnson, Edna O'Brien, John McGahern. I would actually think that Sean O'Casey's plays should be read. Particularly the trilogy, which is Juno and the Paycock, The Shadow of a Gunman and The Plough and the Stars, because it talks about the time around when Ireland was struggling to gain its independence from Britain, and the poverty of our country. I think would have great resonance for Italians around that same time, around the early years of the 20th century. I mean, it's something that I mentioned it last night, but it's not, I think, a very widely known statistic that in the early years of the 20th century, with the tenement buildings, the big Georgian buildings in Dublin, which housed dozens of families, each of them in one room or one part of a room, no toilet, no running water, there would be a tap out in the backyard.
There was an exhibition, the Little
That's
Museum.
right.
Yes,
that's
I
right.
saw,
yes,
I saw it.
And it's horrific.
Yes.
So less than 100 years ago, our infant mortality rate was worse than Calcutta. So I think that O'Casey's plays give a real insight into people's need to survive physically, and to feed their families, and then this layer of political revolution. And what is your response? Which do you go for first? Do you put bread on the table, or do you become involved in a political struggle? Really, really interesting questions. So I think he would have to be my fourth.
Okay.
And after that, I think I'd have to go with poetry.
Seamus.
Absolutely, Seamus Heaney. Absolutely. But I would add, let's do poetry as just one category. I would add in there Patrick Kavanagh and also Evan Boland. Evan Boland, this is very interesting. Evan Boland started her poetry career around the same time as Seamus Heaney. And when they were young poets, the reviews that came in of their work were very, very similar. They were praising their use of language, their insight, the rhythm, all of the body of poetry that each of them was working on. And I read a review put together by an American academic where she examined the responses as their careers went on and where things began to diverge. And Seamus Heaney was lauded for his use of words like dig and spade and bog and manly words. Great praise. Evan Boland was using words like silk, thread, cotton, dealing with the domestic. And immediately the reviews began to diverge.
It's an interesting question, such a critic.
Even in the use of the language was being made into a gender, and therefore one was being regarded as superior to the other. So I think Italian readers might like to rediscover or to discover Evan Boland.
Evan Boland. Okay.
Okay.
So